Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins Awakening, I'm going to take you through the build I recommend for Oghren. This is a damager two-handed build that is mostly focused on using activated talents to kill enemies and buff your warrior's damage and crit chance. You will also have a little bit of support and utility for the team with the champion and guardian specializations, but they are just additions to the main damager aspect of Oghren's build. It's a very easy build to set up, you don't need expensive gear or a lot of extra abilities in addition to what Oghren starts with, and of course you can also use this on another two-handed warrior if you'd like, such as your own warden if you don't enjoy having Oghren in your party. Before we get into the build, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much, and your support allows me to keep going. Joining as a member would help the channel a lot, but of course only do so if you want to and if you can afford it. I'm always grateful even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment. Back to the guide. First, I have a few mods I always recommend. If you've watched my previous Awakening guides, you already know what these are, so you can skip to the next section, but I'm mentioning them in each guide for anyone who's new. Dane's Fixes is the most important mod that fixes a ton of bugs related to combat and implements missing item properties. It has a lot of extra quality of life improvements and balance adjustments, but it's completely modular, so you can just copy the parts you want and ignore the rest. If you use Dane's Fixes, I also recommend more detailed tooltips because it adds more detailed descriptions for all the abilities and item properties in the game. Also related to combat, Advanced Tactics. This mod fixes issues with follower AI and implements more options to choose from in the tactics menu. Having access to these extra conditions for your companion's tactics will help you set up tactics far more comfortably. Finally, Respecification DAO allows you to re-specialize your characters. While in Awakening you can do this with a special item called Tome of Focus, the mod is better because you can respecialize your warden from Origins before you import them into Awakening, which you may feel like you have to do if your build from DAO isn't very good. Tomes of Focus are only available after you complete the first mission of Awakening, so if you think your warden is weak, I definitely recommend respecializing them with the mod. But the mod also allows you to do a partial respec, meaning attribute and ability points are reset, but the character keeps any specializations they already have. This is good if you haven't yet played Awakening, because you won't have the new specializations available from the start. And if you use a Tome of Focus, it will remove all specializations from a companion. That means you wouldn't be able to unlock the new specialization the companion already had until you buy the required specialization tome. With that out of the way, let's get into the build. When you recruit him, Oghren has the following skills unlocked: maxed out combat training and 1 point in vitality. Combat training is the one crucial skill for warriors and rogues, since each rank unlocks a new tier of weapon style talents. Having it maxed out is generally your first priority so that you can pick up the powerful high-tiered weapon talents as soon as they become available. In addition to unlocking those, the second, third, and fourth ranks of combat training also grant the character some additional bonuses. Plus 0.5 combat stamina regeneration, plus 2 attack, and finally plus 1 armor and plus 4 attack. Vitality grants plus 25 health per rank, and I generally recommend maxing this out on any melee character just to ensure they don't die due to taking a lot of damage at once. So it's great Oghren already has 1 point in this. Honestly, this is a perfect start in terms of skills for a warrior. The only thing that's missing is a point in clarity for extra stamina, but once you're level 20 you can pick that up. Oghren has the following starting abilities. From the warrior tree, Powerful, Threaten, Bravery, and Deathblow. Powerful is a passive that grants the warrior plus 25 health and a 10% reduction of fatigue. This is great for any warrior regardless of the armor type they use, since it will keep the cost of their talents down, plus give them a good amount of HP. Threaten is a sustain that doubles the threat generated by the warrior's damage, increasing enemy hostility towards the warrior with each melee attack and thus drawing enemies away from other allies. This is a useful tank talent, but since this Awakening build for Oghren isn't meant to be a tank, you don't need to use it. However, the other two talents in this row are good, so keep it unlocked to have access to them. Bravery is a passive that grants plus 3 mental and physical resistance, plus 1 damage, and also increases the warrior's crit chance by 3.5% for each enemy above 2 engaged with the warrior in melee. I believe that in the vanilla game this crit chance enhancing effect doesn't properly work, and I'm not sure if it was properly implemented by Dane's Fixes. However, the bonus damage and resistances are still decent, so it's worth picking up. Plus, it gives you access to the final passive in the row, which is very nice to have for a build that uses activated talents a lot. Deathblow is a passive that grants the warrior some stamina whenever they cause the killing blow on an enemy. The stamina restored is calculated based on the base value of the victim's health, and it mainly depends on the rank of an enemy. Oghren's build is going to have him dealing damage very frequently with activated talents, so you want to be able to restore as much stamina as you can so that he can keep using his talents. Of course, in Awakening you have stamina drafts and the second wind talent to further help you with it, but Deathblow is a great passive for the build. From the two-handed tree, Pommel Strike, Indomitable, Stunning Blows, potentially Critical Strike if level 19, Sunder Arms, Shattering Blows, Sunder Armor, Mighty Blow, Powerful Swings, Two-Handed Strength, and potentially Two-Handed Sweep if level 20. I'm mentioning the two talents that are at higher levels because if you start Awakening with an Orlesian Warden, you will start at level 18, so you may not have the ones at level 19 or 20 unlocked. Pommel Strike is an ability that deals no damage, but automatically hits and knocks the target down unless it passes a physical resistance check against the warrior's strength. This is great to use to interrupt spellcasters or other enemies who are in the process of using a more dangerous ability. It automatically hits too, so the only thing you have to worry about is the enemy's physical resistance and your strength. And as a two-handed damager warrior, Oghren's strength will be very high, and thus he'll be far more likely to knock the enemy down. Indomitable is a sustained talent that grants the warrior immunity to stun, slip, and knockdown effects. It also grants +1 to your warrior's damage. While this is one of the must-have abilities I recommend for a two-handed tank build, it's also amazing for any kind of build because it will protect you from both enemy abilities and potential friendly fire effects from your mage's spells. I consider this to be the best two-handed talent, hands down, and you'll absolutely want it active at all times. Stunning Blows is a passive that grants a 50% chance for each critical hit of the warrior to stun the opponent. There is no resistance check, so it can't normally be resisted, but it does only apply to critical hits. This is a great passive for a two-handed warrior because you have auto-crit abilities that you'll want to use whenever they come off cooldown, so a 50% chance to stun is a very nice bonus effect to add to those. Critical Strike is an ability that has a +5 to its attack roll. If the strike connects, it's an automatic crit that will outright kill any non-boss enemy if its health is at or below 20%. Otherwise, it does regular critical damage. This is not as good of an auto-crit as Mighty Blow, which costs far less and also interrupts enemy melee auto attacks. However, you still want to use Critical Strike whenever Mighty Blow is on cooldown because with auto-crit abilities, you are ensuring that your warrior is dealing a lot of damage to an enemy. So this will be one of the main damaging abilities of the build. Sunder Arms is an ability that strikes twice and gives the target a -10 attack penalty if they fail a resistance check against a warrior's strength. This is a pretty cheap damaging ability which does 2 strikes, which can both be critical. It's a very solid talent, but not quite as good as the autocrits. Shattering Blows is a passive that is supposed to grant bonus damage versus construct-type enemies, aka golems, sylvans, corpses, and skeletons. In the base game, it's bugged and doesn't grant additional damage, but Dane's Fixes properly implements it. In Awakening, you're not going to really fight a lot of enemies that aren't Darkspawn, but this is fine enough to have for the few times it will be relevant. Plus, it allows you to unlock 2 more talents in this row, so you need it for that. Sunder Armor strikes twice in rapid succession and gives the target a -20 armor penalty for 10 seconds if it fails a physical resistance check against a warrior's strength. Similarly to Sunder Arms, the armor penalty is only applied by the second hit and doesn't stack with itself. This is another good damaging talent due to the fact that it strikes twice, but it's not as cheap in terms of stamina costs as Sunder Arms, so I recommend using it less often. The main draw of it is the huge armor penalty you inflict upon an enemy, so it's best used against enemies with high armor such as physical elites and bosses. Mighty Blow is a cheap strike that has +10 attack and which automatically crits if it connects with a target. The strike also applies a special effect on normal or weaker enemies which will interrupt their basic attack animations. It's also supposed to apply a movement speed penalty to the target unless it passes a physical resistance check against a warrior's strength, but it's not implemented in the base game. Dane's Fixes implements it, making this already amazing talent even better. This is the best auto-crit ability due to being so cheap and having the attack bonus, so you'll want to use it all the time. Powerful Swings is a sustained talent that grants +5 damage but imposes penalties of -10 to both attack and defense. The two-handed strength passive reduces the penalties to only -5. In Awakening, you don't really care about the penalties to attack or defense because you're much higher level and have a lot of extra stats from gear too. That bonus damage is very juicy for a damager, so this is an ability I recommend having active at all times. Two-handed Strength is a passive that upgrades Powerful Swings and reduces the penalties to attack and defense while you have the mode active to be only -5 each. Additionally, your warrior's armor penetration score is increased by 25%. You won't see this bonus on the character screen, but it is taken into consideration when calculating your damage. The AP is the main draw of this in Awakening since, as I said, small penalties to attack or defense won't have that much of an effect on your character. Though of course, it's still good to reduce the penalty. Two-Handed Sweep is an activated talent that is the only AoE ability from Origins. The warrior swings their weapon in an arc around them, dealing normal damage to enemies it hits, and knocks them down unless they pass a physical resistance check against the warrior's strength. The hits can be critical, and the weapon damage roll is maximized. Area of effect abilities are always great, especially for melee characters who often find themselves in the thick of things with enemies surrounding them. Finally, Oghren has the Berserker specialization. The unlock bonuses are amazing, plus 2 strength and plus 10 health, and he should have all of the talents from it unlocked: Berserk, Resilience, Constraint, and Final Blow. Personally, I don't recommend Final Blow because it uses up all your stamina and turns off all your sustain abilities. Berserk is a sustained talent that grants plus 8 damage and plus 10 mental resistance, while also having a minus 2 penalty to stamina regeneration. It can also be improved by passives. Constraint negates the stamina regen penalty, and Resilience adds a health regeneration bonus. The plus 8 damage is a huge increase. To put it into perspective, 1 extra point of strength gives you plus 0.3 damage. So this damage bonus is equal to 26 to 27 points of strength. You absolutely want to have this active at all times. The best part is that Oghren already has the stamina regeneration penalty offset by Constraint, so there's literally no downsides to using Berserk anymore. Resilience is a passive that grants a plus 1.5 bonus to health regen while Berserk is active, and also grants a permanent plus 5% nature resistance bonus to the warrior. This isn't all that important, though a bit of extra health regen is nice to have. Constraint is a passive that provides a plus 2 bonus to stamina regen while Berserk is active, which means that it offsets the basic minus 2 penalty that the ability has. This is perfect since it allows you to use Berserk without having to equip any kind of stamina regeneration gear, so you can mostly focus on offensive stats on your items for this damager build. Final Blow is an activated talent that drains all of the warrior's stamina if the attack hits, with the striker dealing damage equal to half of the total stamina consumed. As I said, I generally don't recommend using this because once your stamina is drained to 0, all of your sustained talents like Berserk, Powerful Swings, and others will deactivate automatically, and then you'll have to wait for them to come off cooldown in order to reactivate them. However, if your warrior has a large stamina pool from investing into willpower and having a bunch of bonuses from gear, you could use this on a boss rank enemy when you're at full or nearly full stamina, which is very easy to do in Awakening with stamina drafts and the second wind ability. But only bosses are worth using this on because elite and lower rank enemies can be killed easily in a couple of big strikes, especially if you use auto-crit abilities like Mighty Blow and Critical Strike. Moving on, Oghren's starting gear is for the most part better than that of the other companions, other than his armor, which is on par with everyone else since it's not that special. Darkspawn Ravager is a tier 6 battle axe with 2 rune slots that grants plus 2% melee crit chance, plus 4 attack, and a huge plus 10 damage versus Darkspawn. This is actually a great weapon for Awakening because of the ton of extra damage it does to Darkspawn, since they are the main enemy type you'll be facing. If you add 2 high-tier Silverite runes to this battle axe, you'll be doing absolutely insane amounts of damage, so I do recommend keeping it for all the combat encounters against Darkspawn. You could have a secondary weapon to use when you fight other enemy types that is more generally useful, but don't sleep on the Darkspawn Ravager. It's really good. Oghren is equipped with a full Legion of the Dead armor set, which grants plus 3 willpower, plus 4 attack, and the set bonus is plus 3 damage and plus 3 constitution. You'll find that all of the starting armors of martial companions are subpar and need to be replaced as soon as possible. Oghren also has the Helm of the Legion equipped, but that is a basic helmet that isn't actually part of the Legion armor set, so you can feel free to replace that with whatever you like, since you won't lose out on the set bonus. One for the Ditch is Oghren's unique companion item, a belt that grants plus 3 constitution and plus 15 physical resistance. It's decent for defensive stats, but you can get much better belts in Awakening for warriors, so I do recommend replacing it unless you want to keep it for sentimental reasons. Smith's Heart is an amulet that grants plus 20% fire resistance and minus 1 dexterity. Fire isn't really that much of an issue in Awakening, and since this has literally no other bonus, you should replace it immediately if possible. Ring of the Warrior is a ring that grants plus 2 strength and plus 2 dexterity. It's a great ring for warriors in general, hence the name, but there are a few better options you might prefer over it. But it's perfect as a starting ring and can be used for the entire game too. Ring of Resistance is a ring that grants plus 1 willpower and plus 1 constitution. It's fine as a secondary ring, but it mostly just gives you plus 5 health and stamina, so replace it as soon as you can with something better. Let's talk recommended attributes. The 2 important ones to focus on are Strength and Constitution. However, for a two-handed warrior who wants to use activated talents pretty often, you also need a good amount of willpower for extra stamina. For Strength, honestly, try to get it as high as you can. 60 or 70 is a great score to aim for. I recommend having somewhere around 35 to 40 base willpower to have a large enough stamina pool to comfortably use all your activated damaging talents multiple times in a fight, as well as potentially deal a lot of damage with Final Blow if you want to use it on bosses. And finally, for Constitution, a base score of about 30 to 35 is very solid. You'll get other bonuses to Constitution and health from gear, so you don't need to invest a lot into it. You may also want to put a few points into Cunning up until you get a base score of 16 so that you can unlock all the ranks of the combat tactics and survival skills. And a few points into Magic up to a score of 13 to 15 would be nice, just so that you can increase the effectiveness that healing has on Oghren. For recommended skills, only 3 are crucial: Combat Training, Vitality, and Clarity. Combat Training is already maxed out, so we'll talk about the other 2. Vitality increases your character's health by 25 per rank. Oghren already has the first rank unlocked, and I recommend maxing it out for a total of 100 extra health. It helps a lot with survivability. Clarity increases your character's stamina or mana by 25 per rank for a total of plus 100 stamina at rank 4. You want to max this out as well because with this damager build, Oghren wants to use a lot of activated abilities, so he wants a big stamina pool. Once you're done with these 3, you could pick up a few ranks of combat tactics to have extra tactic slots for setting up Oghren's automatic behavior in combat if you don't want to manually control him. You could also put points into survival, which increases the character's nature resistance, and also lets you see nearby enemies on the map, which can be useful if you'd like to set up a plan for a more difficult encounter. But you don't really need survival unless you ran out of skills to put points into. I don't recommend getting any of the crafting skills on Oghren since other companions have better starting skills for that. While you could technically coat his weapon with a poison for extra damage or a chance to stun enemies if you get him 1 rank of poison making, two-handed weapons are too slow for it to be worth using poisons. And you don't need to use grenades either, not really, because Oghren will have good area of effect abilities. Moving on to recommended abilities. From the Warrior Tree, unlock Second Wind, Peon's Plight, Grievous Insult, Massacre, and Precise Striking. Second Wind is an activated talent that restores 80% of the warrior's maximum stamina when used. It has a long 2-minute cooldown, so in most fights you're likely only to use this once. But it's still a great talent to refresh your stamina, especially if your warrior is the type to use a lot of activated abilities like Oghren is. Peon's Plight is an activated talent that causes the warrior to strike an enemy with a powerful blow. A successful attack automatically kills a target of normal or lower rank, inflicts a double crit against an elite, and a regular crit against a boss. Unfortunately, this isn't a great talent. Normal rank enemies are already extremely easy to kill, and this deals less damage to elites than most of the new Awakening talents. You could use it for a double crit against elites specifically, but that's about all I recommend it for. Otherwise, just use Mighty Blow or Critical Strike against normal or boss enemies. Grievous Insult is an activated talent that draws the aggression of all enemies within 10 meters by increasing the warrior's threat, but it also physically pulls them towards the warrior, knocking them down in a process similar to the mass pull ability of Revenants. While this is generally a tank talent, it's also useful for damagers who want to bring enemies closer to them to be able to use an AoE ability to damage them. It has a 1-minute cooldown, so it's best used earlier in fights when there's still a significant number of enemies on the field. You don't need to use this often, but it's good to have when Oghren runs out of enemies near him, so he can pull some into his range and then be able to damage them faster than if he were to walk up to them instead. Massacre is an activated talent that makes the warrior deal massive AoE damage to enemies around them. This will only work with a melee weapon, and despite being intended to kill lower rank enemies similarly to Peon's Plight, it doesn't necessarily do that. It just deals area of effect damage that is approximately a double critical shot. Due to this, warriors with two-handed weapons and high strength tend to get the most out of it, so that's great news for Oghren. The stamina cost is pretty big, 100, but it's worth it if you have a bunch of enemies around your warrior, because it will deal a truly huge amount of damage. Precise Striking is a sustained talent that grants the warrior a bonus of plus 10 attack and a variable amount of melee crit chance based on their character level, while giving them a penalty of minus 10% to their attack speed. The maximum melee crit chance bonus from the ability is plus 15%, achieved at level 25. You already start at a high level in Awakening, so this will give you a significant boost to your critical chance from the get-go. And for a damager build like Oghren's that is mainly focused on dealing high amounts of damage with auto attacks, auto crit abilities, and AoE abilities, it's quite nice to have a higher chance for your auto attacks and non-auto crits to become crits. Of course, the 10% penalty to your attack speed can be a bit annoying, but it's not that big of a deal since a lot of your damage will come from activated abilities, plus you can more than offset the penalty if you have a mage with a haste spell in your party. From the two-handed tree, unlock Destroyer and Sweeping Strike. Destroyer is a passive that causes your warrior's critical hits to inflict a penalty of minus 5 armor for 3 seconds. The effects of multiple blows do not stack. In the base game, this just works with the warrior's critical hits, but it's supposed to be all the warrior's attacks. But you know the drill, if you have Dane's Fixes, then this issue is solved and it will make all your warrior's attacks reduce an enemy's armor for a bit. It's not a huge bonus by any means, but it does allow you to essentially do 5 extra damage per hit to an enemy if they have 5 armor to begin with, and thus kill them faster. This isn't a high priority, so feel free to unlock it later on after you've picked up the more important abilities for the build. Sweeping Strike is an AoE damaging ability that strikes enemies in a cone in front of the warrior, very similar to the dual-wielding dual-weapon sweep talent. However, this one is even better because it inflicts a critical strike on the primary target, aka the target you are currently attacking, while dealing just normal damage to the other enemies in the cone. It also can't miss, which is great. Every enemy in the cone will take damage, so it's a very safe talent to use regardless of enemy defenses. It also knocks targets to the ground without a resistance check other than bosses. The only thing to keep in mind is that in the vanilla game, this ability is auto-targeted, meaning that if you already have an enemy that your warrior is currently attacking, the ability will automatically be aimed with them in the center when you use it. If you want to aim it yourself, you'll have to move your character to deselect the enemy, or choose a different enemy first and afterwards use Sweeping Strike on them. If you have Dane's fixes, there is a bug fix that allows you to aim the cone of Sweeping Strike, since you can aim all the other cone abilities. This, of course, is a great AoE ability that you'll want to use fairly often if you have a few enemies clustered together, since it's an auto-crit on the primary target, plus it also knocks enemies down. So unlock this as soon as you're high level enough to do so. The second specialization I recommend for Oghren is Champion. Unlocking the specialization grants the warrior +2 willpower and +1 cunning. The willpower is nice for a bit of extra stamina, so this isn't the worst bonus. Unlock all 4 talents from here: Warcry, Rally, Motivate, and Superiority. Warcry is an activated talent that gives nearby enemies a penalty of -10 attack for 20 seconds. With the Superiority passive, you also have a chance to knock them down unless they pass a physical resistance check versus the warrior's strength. The main reason you want to use this is the knockdown once you've upgraded Warcry with Superiority. The penalty to attack isn't super significant, especially not in Awakening where enemies are higher level and thus have higher attack scores, but being able to knock enemies down or disable them in any way is always useful. Rally is a sustained talent that grants nearby allies +10 defense while this is active. With the Motivate passive, your allies also get a +10 attack bonus. Do keep in mind, however, that the warrior also gets a penalty of -2 stamina regeneration while this is active, so be careful to have gear that offsets this penalty in order to be able to keep it sustained without issues. This is a more supportive ability that you can keep active to buff your allies, especially if you have 2 or more melee characters in your party. You don't necessarily need this ability, but buffing Oghren's attack and the attack of other melee allies with the upgraded version of Rally is very nice, to ensure you manage to hit enemies as often as possible with your auto attacks and damaging talents. Motivate is a passive that upgrades the Rally talent to also grant a +10 attack bonus. A very useful upgrade for Rally since, as I said, improving your attack is great so that you manage to hit more often and thus kill enemies faster and easier. Superiority is a passive that upgrades the Warcry talent to have a chance to knock down enemies. The potential knockdown from Warcry is the main reason I like the Champion specialization, so absolutely pick this up as quickly as you can. The third specialization, Guardian, has higher level requirements for its abilities, level 20, 22, and 25, so that's why I recommend unlocking the Champion abilities first, since you can get these talents earlier and have some nice utility and support capabilities on Oghren. The final specialization I recommend is Guardian. This is a very interesting specialization that you'd think is good for a tank because it focuses on protecting allies. However, I prefer to use it on damagers or off tanks because tanks already have their threat-related talents that they need to use their stamina on. So I like to let tanks focus on managing enemy aggression and keeping it on to themselves. Meanwhile, damagers and off-tanks, aka tanky characters who don't juggle enemy threat, are free to use a protective ability here and there on their allies because they will generally be using less sustained talents and also have a bigger stamina pool. It's also a matter of not putting all your eggs in one basket. If you split up support capabilities between all party members, where even damagers have at least 1 or 2 abilities that buff or protect the others, then even if one of the party members goes down, such as your tank or healer, you haven't lost all of your support abilities. Your regular tank will do their job and keep the party protected most of the time, and Oghren can focus on protecting one particular party member, such as the highest damage rogue or a mage. The unlock bonuses are +1 constitution and +5% nature resistance, which don't really matter, you just want access to the abilities from here. I recommend unlocking the first 3 abilities because the 4th one has some terrible penalties that make it practically unusable. Guardian's Shield is an activated talent that designates a particular ally to be protected, creating a shield around them that lessens the damage the ally takes by an amount based on the Guardian's Constitution score, more specifically 30% of the result of Constitution -10. With Master Guardian, this gets upgraded to 50% of the result of Constitution -10. The shield lasts for 30 seconds. This is a great protective shield you can give to either another melee damager like a second two-handed warrior or a dual wielder, or you could also give this to a mage, whether short range or long range, to protect them a little better from any damage that may come their way. While Oghren isn't a proper tank for the party because he isn't using any abilities that have to do with threat, other than occasionally using the Grievous Insult ability to physically pull enemies towards him, he can still protect one of his allies in this way. I would personally choose one particular party member and use Guardian's Shield on them if their health is under 60% or so. Fortifying Presence is an activated talent that applies a buff to the party granting between +5 to 15 armor for 10 to 30 seconds, depending on the Guardian's constitution. However, the armor granted by this decays over time, so the party doesn't get the full amount for the entire duration. The ability does stack with itself, but the existing stacks keep their original duration, but you can keep using it to get extra armor because it has a super short cooldown of 10 seconds. Obviously, if you have two Guardian warriors in the party, they can both keep using this to grant a huge amount of armor to the party. This isn't necessarily the best talent though, because tanky characters already tend to have high armor and other defensive stats. There are a few unavoidable enemy abilities like Grab and Overwhelm which don't care about your defense or dodge chance, so in that case the bonus armor from Fortifying Presence would be quite helpful to reduce the damage that a character affected by these abilities is taking. Though Guardian's Shield would help even more, as with something like a Mage's Force Field or an ability that disables the enemy using the Grab or Overwhelm and thus interrupts them. If you have Master Guardian, it's much easier to get the max armor buff and duration, since you'll only need 37 Constitution for that, and while you'll have more Constitution than that, you won't have the whopping 91 Constitution that you'd need without the upgrade. So if you plan on using this, absolutely get Master Guardian. Speaking of, Master Guardian upgrades Guardian's Shield to provide more damage mitigation to the chosen ally, 50% of the result of the Guardian's Constitution -10 instead of 30%, and it also upgrades Fortifying Presence to have much lower Constitution requirements to reach the +15 armor buff and the 30-second max duration. Absolutely amazing already, even if just for the extra damage mitigation of Guardian's Shield, but also good for Fortifying Presence. Moving on to recommended gear. As part of recommending items for Awakening, I'll mostly recommend items you can obtain in Awakening. I can't usually recommend DAO items because you don't always import your Warden, and even if you do, it's not guaranteed you'll have every item in your inventory. I will mention something from DAO if I think it would be particularly nice, or if Awakening doesn't have enough good options, but otherwise you'll have to figure out for yourself whether an Origins item is suitable for the build. To make that easier, I'll explain the main bonuses to look for. Generally, you want Strength, Constitution, Armor, Stamina or Willpower, and Fatigue reduction where possible on armor and accessories. On weapons, any bonus damage is great, whether physical or fire, or damage against a specific enemy type as long as you fight a lot of them, like Darkspawn. Bonuses to crit chance and crit damage are great for this build since you have a decent amount of auto-crit abilities, and it's also amazing to crit with two-handed weapons since they have such high base damage. Armor penetration and attack are nice to have, but not necessary. Most enemies have quite low armor, and you should have enough attack from investing into strength. On armor pieces, bonuses to Strength, Constitution, Armor, Health Regen, Physical Resistance, Fatigue Reduction, as well as any offensive bonuses such as crit chance or crit damage are great. Other defensive stats like Missile Avoidance, Defense, Dodge Chance, Spell Resistance, and the like are fine, but not a priority for this damager build. For accessories, bonuses to attributes are the main thing you'll find, so all attributes, Strength and Constitution are the main ones to look for. Extra Willpower and Stamina is always good too. You may find a couple of other amazing bonuses on a few accessories, but those are uncommon or even unique to one item, so not a general recommendation. Now that you know the general stats to look for on gear, here are my personal item recommendations. For weapons, here are the best ones. The Darkspawn Ravager that Oghren starts with, as I've already said, is an amazing weapon to use against Darkspawn, so I generally recommend keeping it for all combat encounters that are mainly made up of Darkspawn enemies. But I'll also offer a few two-handed weapons that you can use against all enemy types, in case you want one for the few non-Darkspawn you'll fight as a secondary weapon, or even as a main one. Dragonbone Cleaver is a tier 9 battle axe with 3 rune slots that grants +9 willpower, +7 damage, and +15% crit or backstab damage. It's a DLC-related item that you'll have in your inventory from the start if you defeat the Vartero on Hard or Nightmare in the Witch Hunt DLC. This is by far the highest damage two-handed weapon, plus battle axes have the highest based critical rate, so that's always a bonus too. Frenzy is a tier 8 battle axe with 3 rune slots that grants +0.5 combat health regen, +5 damage, +10% spell resistance, and +10 attack. You can obtain this in a bunch of ways. The first method is if you offer the golden idol of Korth or a diamond at the Shrine of Korth in the Deep Road section beneath Vigil's Keep. While doing the quest, it comes from beneath. You can also buy one from Glassrick and Amaranthine for 12 gold and 30 silver, and if you have an important warden from Origins who recruited Loghain, and both your warden and Loghain survived the final battle, Loghain will gift you this battle axe together with 10 gold when he meets you in the throne room of Vigil's Keep. This is the best base game high damage two-handed weapon in Awakening, so if you don't have the Dragonbone Cleaver, this is the one I'd recommend using if you want something that's going to hit all enemy types pretty hard. Moving on to armor. For Oghren's build, I will actually only recommend 2 full armor sets instead of recommending separate pieces, because these 2 sets give him exactly the kind of stats he's interested in. First up, the Sentinel armor set. It's a tier 9 massive armor set comprised of a helmet, gloves, chest piece, and boots, and you can obtain the chest piece in the Black Marsh by looting the body of the first after you return from the Fade. The other 3 pieces are looted from chests in parts of the Black Marsh that become accessible after you touch all 3 Veil Tear apparitions in the Fade during the Tears in the Veil quest. The full set grants plus 8 Constitution, plus 1.5 combat health regen, plus 12 defense, plus 3% melee crit chance, plus 6 attack, plus 14 strength, missile avoidance, plus 25 physical resistance, and the set bonus is plus 0.5 armor and minus 15% fatigue. This set is absolutely perfect for warrior damagers, and it's my top pick for Oghren. If you want to recruit Sigrun before you go to the Black Marsh, then you can pick up another amazing massive armor set from Kal Hural, Hural's Defense. It's a tier 8 massive set comprised of a helmet, gloves, chest piece, and boots. You can find the breastplate in a damaged state in a side chamber of the Kal Hural main hall. Together with the greaves that you find in the ancient dwarven crate near the entrance, you can take them to the forge in the trade quarter to repair them. The gauntlets are found in the sarcophagus by solving the rune puzzle in the tomb room of the trade quarter. It's a super easy color matching puzzle, so don't worry. Finally, the helm is found in one of the crates in the treasury of the trade quarter. The full set grants plus 4 strength, plus 10 constitution, plus 6 defense, plus 10% spell resistance, plus 15 mental resistance, plus 3% melee crit chance, plus 1 armor penetration, plus 30% fire resistance, minus 10% fatigue, and the set bonus is another minus 10% fatigue. It's not quite as good as the Sentinel set, but it's very close to it, so it's still extremely good for Oghren or another warrior damager on your team. I recommend using separate unique armor pieces on some of your other characters who are interested in other specific stats. Oghren will be very happy with one of these 2 armor sets. Moving on to accessories. For belts, you can keep Oghren's starting one if you'd like, but I personally recommend using one of these 2 instead. Gladiator's Belt grants plus 2 strength, dexterity, and willpower, and plus 4 attack. You can obtain it during the Tears in the Veil quest in the Black Marsh, complete the puzzle in the Fade with the 6 pillars, and once you return to the real world, you can loot the runic pedestal for the belt. If you want a more offensively focused belt, then Wasp's Sting grants plus 1 armor penetration, plus 6 attack, and plus 5% crit or backstab damage. You can loot it from the Ogre Commander in the Deep Roads portion under Vigil's Keep during the quest it comes from beneath. For amulets, there are 2 amazing options. Scout's Medal grants plus 2 dexterity, plus 10 constitution, plus 2 armor, and plus 50 stamina. You can buy it from Uriah in the throne room of Vigil's Keep for a bit over 84 gold. This is my top pick because the huge bonus to constitution is going to make Oghren have a lot of extra health and be better able to absorb damage taken by an important rogue or mage in the party with his guardian ability. Plus, the other stats are also amazing, in particular the armor and stamina. However, you may like to use this amulet on a tank, or perhaps even a mage, health for blood magic, stamina which turns into mana for regular spellcasting. In that case, I recommend this second amulet. Rough-Hewn Pendant is a warrior-restricted amulet that grants plus 10% crit or backstab damage and minus 25% fatigue. You can loot it from the Queen of the Black Marsh after you defeat her. The fatigue reduction is amazing, since Oghren will use a lot of activated talents to deal damage to enemies, and many of his talents have pretty short cooldowns. If they cost less stamina, he can use them more often without needing to use Second Wind or a stamina draft. For rings, there's a real shortage of good warrior rings in Awakening, so unfortunately there's only a couple of rings I recommend from Awakening, in addition to Oghren's decent Ring of the Warrior that he starts with, which grants plus 2 strength and dexterity. You may also have a second copy of this ring equipped on your Orlesian Warden if they're a warrior or rogue, or if you imported your Warden from Origins, you may have the ring if you completed the quest The Drifter's Cache. Corrin's Proposal grants plus 2 to all attributes, and it's a reward for the side quest The Trail of Love in the Black Marsh. Tingler grants plus 4 constitution, plus 0.75 combat health regeneration, and plus 15% to healing effects received. You can loot this in the basement of Vigil's Keep behind a secret door next to a statue of Andraste. You can open the secret door by interacting with the torch next to the statue. Keep in mind the healing effect bonus isn't implemented in the base game, but it does work if you have Dane's fixes. You may want to use this on a blood mage instead, since they very much appreciate constitution and health regen though, so this isn't a necessity for Oghren. You could also steal one of Justice's starting rings, Dawn Ring, which grants +4 strength and -1 cunning. Since Oghren is meant to be one of the main damagers for your team with this build, he will very much appreciate the extra damage and attack that he gets from this bonus to strength. If you imported your Warden from Origins, you may also have a copy of this if you meet with Shiani in the Alienage during the final battle as you rescue the elves. The 2 rings from Origins that are pretty much always useful for all characters are Life Giver, which grants +10 Constitution, +3 Combat Health Regen, +10 Exploration Health Regen, +3 Armor, and +20% to healing effects received, and Key to the City, which grants +2 to all attributes, +4% spell resistance, and +10% to healing effects received. Both rings can be obtained in Orzammar. Life Giver is sold by Oghren in the Orzammar Commons. The Key to the City can be obtained by doing the secret quest, The Key to the City, by interacting with 5 codex entries spread all over Orzammar. Obviously, these are only going to be options for you if you imported your Origins Warden, but I figured I'd mention them since most of the rings for warriors in Awakening are quite subpar. When it comes to runes and consumables, I mostly recommend focusing on weapon and armor runes. While Oghren could improve his damage slightly and potentially stun enemies by applying a poison to his weapon, two-handed attacks are far too slow to be effective at using poisons. Far better to keep your poisons and weapon coatings for your dual-wielder characters. Grenades aren't needed either, since Oghren has some nice AoE damaging abilities. However, if you do want to have the option of using grenades once in a while for extra AoE, you can absolutely unlock the first rank of poison making so that Oghren can use grenades of any tier. For weapon runes, I mostly recommend ones that add damage to your strikes. Flame and lightning runes are best. Flame because Darkspawn and Undead are weak to fire, and Darkspawn are the main enemy type you fight in Awakening. Lightning because other than the Queen of the Black Marsh, very few enemies are resistant to electricity damage, and electricity also has the added bonus of draining stamina from non-mage enemies. However, because in Awakening you end up fighting a ton of Darkspawn, I also recommend high-tier Silverite runes because those add far more damage against Darkspawn specifically. Unless you have some high-tier weapon runes imported from Origins, you'll have to craft runes for yourself. Plus, Awakening has higher rune tiers available above Grandmaster, so you'd likely want to upgrade your runes to Paragon tier if you have the money to spend on materials. For armor runes, the best ones are Stout runes, which grant Constitution. Remember that Oghren will have the Guardian's Shield ability that reduces the damage an ally takes, and the damage reduction is based on his Constitution score, so the higher his Constitution, the better. Obviously, more Constitution also means more max health, which is always great to have for survivability, since it is quite likely Oghren will be targeted by enemies pretty often due to dealing a high amount of damage and being in melee range of them. For consumables, in general, you only really need health poultices and stamina drafts to top up Oghren's health and stamina respectively, if they get too low. Finally, let's talk about tactics and party composition. In terms of party composition, my general recommendation will always stay the same: 1 tank, 1 mage, and at least 1 ranged character, whether archer or mage. By tank, I mean a character who can draw enemy aggression away from their squishier allies. Normally, this is a warrior who can use Threaten, Taunt, and Grievous Insult to generate more threat towards enemies, though an Arcane Warrior Mage can also act as an effective tank without these warrior talents if they use certain spells that draw a lot of threat. Oghren is mostly a damager, even though he is quite tanky and can protect allies with the use of Guardian's Shield and Grievous Insult. But I would recommend you use a proper tank too, whether a weapon and shield warrior like Justice, an arcane warrior, or a two-handed tank. Mages are always useful no matter your party composition, whether for damage, healing, buffs, debuffs, and disabling effects. They're super versatile and powerful, and so unless you're doing a challenge or roleplay run of some sort where you're limiting yourself to not using magic, I highly recommend having at least 1 mage in your party. As for having a ranged character, it's mostly due to the fact that if you have a full melee party, your characters will get stuck a lot in corridors and other cramped spaces, trying to maneuver around each other instead of attacking enemies. It's pretty annoying, and you can avoid this positioning problem by having a mixed ranged party with at least 1 ranged character, if not 2. It's also very nice to have ranged abilities and attacks because it means you'll be able to start damaging and affecting enemies much faster without needing to run up to them to do so. However, this is all the advice I have for party compositions. Ultimately, it's up to you who you choose to bring along because you should have a party that you feel comfortable playing and which includes the companions you like. My recommendations are just suggestions based on my experience and playstyle preferences, so don't take them as rules. Especially if you're playing on easy or normal, pretty much anything can work. For Oghren's tactics, you will be mainly focusing on the good damaging talents that Oghren has, together with the handful of sustained abilities he needs to have active at all times. if you still have a bit of space at the end. It's also good to have tactics for using health poultices if his HP gets too low, and stamina drafts if his stamina gets too low. First up, the sustained talents. All of the necessary ones should be active at all times, and you can easily set them up as self, any, activate X. Indomitable will protect Oghren from stuns, knockdowns, and slip effects. Berserk grants him a huge +8 damage bonus. Powerful Swings grants a very solid +5 damage bonus as well, with just a tiny -5 attack and defense penalty that Oghren will be absolutely fine with. Precise Striking increases Oghren's attack and crit chance while reducing his attack speed by 10%. Rally is the only optional sustained here because it only grants +10 attack and defense to Oghren and your party, which you may not consider to be important enough to keep it active for. Plus, it has a -2 stamina regeneration penalty, so you would need to offset that with some bonuses from gear. You already get +0.5 stamina regen from one of the ranks of the combat training skill, so you only really need an extra +1.5 from gear, so it's very easy to have enough to keep Rally active without draining your stamina. But Rally isn't strictly necessary, so you could skip it if you want to have more tactic slots available for the activated talents. For the activated talents, there are a few that are the best and thus most important to include in your tactics. Mighty Blow and Critical Strike are the best auto-crit abilities that damage a single enemy, so you can set them up to be used on the nearest visible enemy. I do always recommend putting Mighty Blow higher on your tactics list because it's cheaper, and so you want to use it more often than Critical Strike. Warcry should be used if Oghren is surrounded by 3 or more enemies because it will knock them down, and that's always nice. Similarly, Two-Handed Sweep and Massacre should also be used if Oghren is surrounded by 3 or more enemies. These two abilities will deal a lot of area of effect damage, but they aren't cheap, so that's why you only want to use them if there's a decent amount of enemies that will be affected by them. Sweeping Strike should be used if 3 or more enemies are clustered together. While this is also an auto-crit, because it's more expensive to activate than Mighty Blow and Critical Strike, it's best used against a group of enemies since it also has that AoE damage against the secondary targets, so you might as well use its full effect. Second Wind should be used when Oghren's stamina is below 20% because it will restore 80% of his max stamina. Finally, Guardian's Shield should be used on your most important squishy damager, aka a rogue or mage, to ensure they're not dying so easily. Choose one party member and activate this when their health goes under a certain threshold like 60%. There are other talents that can be useful, but which I only recommend adding to your tactics if you have the space, or otherwise you can use them manually every once in a while if you want to. Pommel Strike is nice to use against a spellcaster, aka an enemy using magic type attacks, or else can be used to interrupt a melee or ranged enemy using a dangerous ability. But other than setting it up in tactics to target spellcasters, this is best used manually when you find the right moment. Though of course a huge auto-crit ability might do the trick just as well and kill the offending enemy. Sunder Arms is a pretty decent damaging talent, but in Awakening you already have 2 single-target auto-crits, 1 AoE ability that also deals an auto-crit to the primary target, and 2 AoE talents, so you don't really need this anymore. If you're going to control your warrior manually, then you can keep this on your ability bar and use it every once in a while if literally all your other single-target abilities are on cooldown. Sunder Armor is decent if used against enemies with high armor rating since it reduces their armor, but here's the thing. 1. Your damagers will either have a good armor penetration score or else be mages who don't care about enemy armor at all. And 2, with the damaging abilities that Oghren can use, he can very easily kill enemies simply due to the huge amount of damage his abilities deal. So other than when you're fighting a boss rank enemy, enemies won't really last long enough for you to care to reduce their armor. So you don't need to add this to your tactics. Keep it on your ability bar if you'd like, just use it against a particularly tanky boss, but that's about it. Grievous Insult is nice to use to pull enemies closer to Oghren so that he can damage them, but I'm not sure exactly when the right time to use this would be. Maybe if Oghren is surrounded by no enemies, so that hopefully there's enemies within the range of Grievous Insults to be pulled towards him. This ability would be best used manually, but you can definitely try using it like that when there's no enemies surrounding Oghren. Peon's Plight could optionally be used against specifically elite rank enemies because they would take damage equal to a double crit, but that's it. So I don't recommend wasting a tactic slot for this, just use it manually against elites if you really want to, otherwise your regular crit abilities are going to be just fine. Fortifying Presence is only an optional talent because you don't necessarily need this armor buff unless you're fighting enemies that deal very high physical damage. There aren't that many of those, just Blighted or Shadow Werewolves and boss rank enemies. If you really want to use this, you can set it to activate when your tank's HP goes below 40%, because that likely means they're being damaged a lot and very quickly and haven't gotten to heal themselves, and your mages haven't been able to keep up the healing either, so something must be going wrong. There is one ability I don't recommend setting up in the tactics at all that you could use manually in very specific situations. Final Blow should only be used against a boss rank enemy and only if you have full or almost full stamina. So use it manually to ensure you're using it at an appropriate time when your stamina is high so that you actually deal a huge amount of damage to the boss, because otherwise there's no point in putting all of your sustained abilities on cooldown. Finally, remember to add a tactic for Oghren to use a health poultice when his HP gets under a certain threshold. On lower difficulties, I recommend choosing 30 to 40% HP, whereas on higher difficulties it's best to have it at 60% due to enemies being likely to use dangerous abilities like Grab and Overwhelm when your characters are under 60% health. Choose a tactic that uses the lowest tier available poultice, because like this, Oghren can use whichever poultice you have available at the time, and you don't have to worry about him not healing himself if you ran out of a particular tier of poultices, or if it's currently on cooldown because he just used one. For the stamina draft tactic, it's a similar situation. I'd recommend having one at the very bottom of your tactics that makes Oghren use the lowest tier available draft when his stamina is under 20%. In conclusion, Oghren's build is a simple but extremely effective two-handed damager. I think it fits his character best to not have anything overly complicated going on. He is a Berserker who wants to fight and kill Darkspawn, nothing more, nothing less. I'll be honest, I don't usually use Oghren, so I tend to make this kind of build for my Warden or Respecialized Justice into a two-handed warrior. What I like best about it is that it requires such little investment. You can get a good armor set for free, same thing with a weapon, and it takes very little time to unlock the most important abilities you need from the warrior and two-handed trees. The champion and guardian abilities are great, certainly useful, yes, but frankly optional since the main point is the damage. I hope you found this build guide for Oghren in Dragon Age Origins Awakening useful. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future guides and other videos I plan to make about Dragon Age and other games I care about. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.